Hey everybody, it's Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Firestone Air Command wireless compressor system on our 2016 Ford F-250. Now, if you have airbags on your truck, it's really nice. You know, whether you tow a lot of different things, or maybe you have a camper or a trailer that you always pull, but once you get something heavy back there, you realize we get a lot of squat. Well, the airbags take care of that. But once you start changing those loads, you unhook or you hook up to another trailer, then you got to find somewhere to either deflate the bags or find an air compressor to fill them back up. So there's just a lot of traveling, a lot of extra steps we got to do. Not to mention, a lot of times we don't even have access to air. We don't want to drive all the way home just to adjust the bags. So having an onboard air compressor definitely makes it a lot more convenient and takes a little bit of the stress out of all those situations. But with most compressor systems, they are going to be a wired system, which means we're going to have a lot of wire going back and forth to the compressors, and it's going to need to come into the cab. Well, and even if you do have a lot of the other wireless compressors out on the market, they have a separate controller, which we got to keep track of. And let's face it, I'm not very good at keeping track of stuff, especially if I already have a whole bunch of other stuff I'm doing, hooking up my camper, anything like that. A little controller is the last thing on my mind. So those can be easily lost. But you know, one thing that all of us I know do definitely keep our eyes on is our phone. Well, our Firestone Air Command is going to work through an app so we can use our Android or Apple device to control our airbags from the comfort of inside of our cab, or we could even do it outside and watch to see how level our truck is. Now, we're going to be able to do quite a bit through the app. But the nice thing is we're going to get a really large gauge, so we can just glance over our phone and know exactly where our bags are set. Now, if we come down to the bottom here, it'll say target. That's where we want our pressure to be, and then it'll have an arrow on either side, so we can adjust it down, up, whatever we need to get to that target area to get our bags, so the back end of our truck isn't sagging and we can have a comfortable ride. Now, a few other little features that are in the app, really easy to use, but I definitely appreciate, is the fact that we can set two different memories to what pressure we want to set. So if you happen to tow the same trailer, you know the load's not going to change, we can click on the target number, that's where we want our pressure set, and that's going to bring up an M1 and an M2. Now, if we hold M1 or M2, it's going to ask you if you want to store whatever pressure you're at to memory 1. So now we can, no matter what pressure we're at, we can drop the pressure down to 35. And once it gets down low enough and it stops, we can click on that memory and it'll go right back to where we want it to be. So it's a little thing, but it's a lot nicer just being able to click a single button rather than having to scroll through. And the other nice thing is that our compressor is going to constantly be monitoring what's going on. Once it gets down to the set pressure, we can click on the settings button over here, and that'll bring up a few different options for us. We can see at the top, we can either read our pressure in PSI or in bar. You just simply push the button, it'll switch over. Then we have dark mode, which that's going to switch between a contrast, if you rather have a dark screen or a light screen. Your memory settings. We're going to have any kind of faults that show up if we have anything wrong with our compressor, whether it be electrically or anything that the compressor is reading, it's going to let us know. And then also we're going to be able to look into the status of everything. Now, the status is going to tell us that if our Bluetooth is connected, if the compressor's on or off, the battery voltage, and everything else. So we're going to have a really good idea of exactly what's going on. Now, one last thing I do want to mention about the app is that it does use a passkey. Now, the passkey is going to be in your instructions, and if you don't change it, you can actually use multiple different devices at the same time. So if you have your spouse with you, a friend with you, maybe your phone dies, well, you can grab their phone and still control all your bags so long as you use the same passkey. So here's what our compressor looks like. We chose to mount ours on the side of the frame here. Now, this compressor is going to be a 12-volt light-duty compressor. And what that means is it's going to run off of the 12-volt in the battery in our truck, but at the same time, it is a light-duty compressor, so it's going to be great for occasional towing, or if you're just not towing something that heavy-duty. So the compressor is going to have a maximum pressure of 120 psi, and they do recommend that you at least keep 5 psi in your airbags. So that's going to be a range that our compressor will go to, between 5 and 120. Now you just want to keep in mind that even though this goes up to 120, a lot of airbags only go up to 100 psi. So you don't want to max out your bags or go any higher than they can, even if your compressor can go higher. Now, aside from the actual compressor, we're going to have the ECU. Now, this is going to be the electronic control unit that's going to be monitoring the pressure and sending out the signal so that it can turn the compressor on. Now, the nice thing about this is this can be mounted just about anywhere so long as we have enough room to connect everything together and get the wires routed. You'll notice this epoxy looking material that's on there. That's actually a potting material, and it's completely filled this entire box. So our ECU is going to withstand most automotive chemicals, most road grime that we may see. So a little bit of road spray isn't going to hurt it, along with any kind of road salt or anything like that. And again, the nice thing is that we can mount it just about anywhere. We've got a couple of holes to mount it using screws, or if you really can't find a good spot, we have a couple notches that we could actually zip tie the ECU to. Now, one of my favorite things, besides the convenience of having an onboard compressor, is the fact that it's going to be virtually maintenance-free. We're not going to have to grease anything, there's no oil that we have to add or anything like that. But if we come to our compressor and we see this black hose that's coming out of the side here, that's actually our intake. Now this hose does go, the end of it has an air filter on it, and that's the one thing I would say that you kind of want to keep an eye on. Just like any kind of air filter, if it does get clogged, it is going to reduce the amount of performance we get out of our compressor. So it's just an easy way every once in a while to periodically check that filter and replace it for the best performance. Now, so long as the battery is charged in our truck, we shouldn't have any problems with our compressor running. But sometimes we may run into an issue where we don't have our phone, maybe our phone's not charged, but we do have a manual inflation valve so we can deflate or inflate our bags to the necessary pressure in case we can't use the compressor for whatever reason. Now our compressor is going to be a single path, and what that means is we're only going to have one output. So one airline is going to control both airbags at the same time. So we're definitely going to get that front to back level so we can keep the back end from sagging down too much, but we're not going to be able to use side to side. So both bags are going to inflate and deflate at the same time. Now I do want to mention our Firestone compressor is designed for Firestone airbags. However, it will work with any brand of air springs you have. You just want to, again, keep in mind the duty cycle of the compressor and how much your airbags can hold, and we want to kind of match those up. We don't want a compressor that's too small for the bags you have, but at the same time you don't want a compressor that can go way higher in pressure than the bags can handle themselves. But now that we've seen what our compressor system looks like and understand how it works, let's go bring our truck into the shop and we can go through the installation process together. To begin our installation, we want to grab the compressor and the ECU out of the kit, and we're also going to be grabbing the barb fitting and the 1/4-inch push connect fitting out of our kit. And you kind of want to find a general spot that you think you're going to be mounting the compressor and ECU. We're going to be mounting ours on the passenger side frame rail here, but we want to get a few pieces in place before we mount it up. On the bottom of our compressor, at the red section here, we're going to have a plug. You want to go ahead and grab that plug and pull it out. Now on the end here, we want to take the barb fitting and we're going to thread it into the end of the compressor. Now there's only a couple threads on there, so you want to make sure it actually starts threading, it doesn't cross thread. And then once it gets started threading on there, we want to get a wrench and tighten it down. You're going to want to use a 1/2-inch wrench to tighten that up. Now you do want to make sure it's threaded all the way in there, but we don't want to crank on it too much and cause any damage. So just where it's nice and snug and the threads actually engage. And once you have the barb fitting in, we'll come to the section that's sticking up on our compressor. We'll remove the other cap. And then we're going to have that 1/4-inch push connect fitting, and we want to thread that into the end of that brass piece. Now you want to get this in there hand tight as you can get it. And then you'll notice that we got thread locker on there. You want to tighten it down until we get at least a couple threads of thread locker engaged. But you also don't want to over tighten it to where you're going to crush it or damage the threads on there. So now we want to take our compressor and we're going to be putting it roughly where we're going to mount it up at. Now obviously you can see we have some things running across the frame on the outside. You do want to double check the other side of the frame, make sure there's nothing there. But we're going to take our compressor, again, use it as a template. So you either take a marker and you're going to mark the 4 holes to mount it up, or you can take a small drill bit, go through the bushing and make a mark on the frame. We just want to make a mark so that we can drill all 4 of those locations out and mount the compressor to the frame. I went and used the included hardware, and I actually took the screws coming from the inside of the frame and then put the washers and nuts on the outside. Now it may be a little difficult to get behind there, but I like the idea of using washers and nuts rather than just using self-tappers for the compressor, because this is a little bit heavy. We want to make sure it's nice and secure. And again, I can grab this, start shaking it, and it's not going to come loose. We don't have to worry about it working loose over time. Now we can take our ECU. On either side, we're going to have a hole, but at the same time, we're also going to have a few eyelets on the top and bottom. So we have a couple different ways that we can mount this. I'm still going to mount mine right against the frame, but since this is a little bit lighter and we don't have to worry about it moving as much, I'm just going to use some self-tapping screws going through the ends of each hole. Now you can also use the large nylon zip ties that are in the kit and actually zip tie it to something. You just want to make sure that the ECU is also going to be nice and secure, and try to get it away from as much water and road spray as you can. So I'm going to be mounting ours pretty close to the compressor but high up on the frame. With our ECU and compressor mounted, we can start making some of our electrical connections. Our red wire here is going to have a quick connect spade terminal on it, and our black wire coming off the compressor is going to have a ring terminal already pre-installed. That black wire with the ring terminal is going to be your ground. So we want to find a nice solid piece of sheet metal and we want to ground this out. So I'm actually going to kind of stretch the wire out, not completely tight, but I'm going to go a little bit forward so I don't have so much slack in that wire. Now they are going to provide you with a self-tapping screw. So you want to grab a 5/16 nut driver and we can get the ground in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the screw started first, about the area that I want to put my ground. And then once we have the hole, we can put the screw back in with the ring terminal. Once you have the hole made, tighten up that screw. And you want to make sure that ring terminal is nice and secure. It's not moving around like this. But you do want to be careful because the frame is very hard and there is a chance that you may break the self-tapping screw. So if it starts to bind up, I usually back it out a little bit and then I'll go back in until I can get it fully secure and that ring terminal isn't moving around. So make sure it's nice and tight, but again, don't break or strip out the screw. So now we want to grab our harness. We want to grab the end that has the connector on it, as well as the quick spade connector. Quick spade connector is going to hook directly into the wire that's coming off the compressor. And just plug it in. Make sure you get a good connection inside there, that it's actually engaging. These can be a little deceiving just because there's a little coating around the terminal. Sometimes it'll get stuck and not actually go on the terminal. So you just want to make sure you get it on there. It's fully seated. And then the connector end is actually going to go directly into the ECU right next to that air fitting. Now, I always like to put a little bit of dielectric grease inside the connector, and that's just going to help prevent any kind of corrosion from building up inside. Just going to fill up that whole cavity. I'll take my connector, plug it in, make sure we get that click, and it locks in place. Now the other end of our harness, we want to take, there's going to be 2 ring terminals and another wire coming off the end. We want to take all three of these and route them along the side of the frame going towards the front until we can reach the battery. Now the only thing I will say is everybody's going to take a little bit of a different path and route it differently. You just want to make sure that your wires are protected. You stay away from any major heat sources like the exhaust or any moving components like the steering or suspension up front. But I'm going to go ahead and route this into the engine bay and I'll show you how I got it there. So I started routing my wire towards the front. I started going around this first body mount to kind of keep the wires close to the frame as I can. Just zip tying it to some existing lines. Again, just going towards the front, following the frame rail. And once I got to this forward body mount right here, I will let you know it's a little bit tight to get the fuse holder and everything through that opening, but it will fit. I went around that body mount, and then that actually puts us right at the back of the front fender liner, and I just put my wire straight up, right close to the firewall, and our wire ended up, again, just going straight up right behind the fender liner, so it's still protected, but just went straight into the engine bay. So once you have your wire up, over here on the passenger side, we are going to have quite a bit of slack. Now, the only wires we really need to pay attention to is the two wires that have ring terminals on them. Those are going to be our power and our ground. The yellow wire that has a cap on it is not going to be used. We want to make sure we protect this wire and we don't have it connect to any metal or cause any shorts. So I'm just going to go ahead and bundle up the excess wire. For now, I'm just going to leave it pretty loose and just set it aside. We can always tuck it back and tie it up, but we do want to come to the fuse holder that's on the red wire. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and pull out the fuse. That way we don't have to worry about, again, any kind of shorts or anything. We'll set this aside for now, and we can go ahead and get our electrical hooked up, and without the fuse in place, we don't have to worry about it. Now, one thing you kind of want to pay attention to is I'm leaving lots of slack so I can come back later and tie everything up and make it look nice. But for now, we just want to take our red wire and we're going to attach it to the positive terminal on the battery. And our black wire, we're going to attach directly to the negative terminal. Now the black wire is your ground, and the reason why we want to ground it directly to the battery is so we know that we have a really solid ground and that our ECU and compressor can get the most accurate reading. So we'll grab a 10mm socket. We're going to loosen up the nut that's on the positive post. We'll take the ring terminal on the red wire, put it over the stud, and reinstall the nut. Now again, you want to make sure that the fuse is not in place because we don't want any power actually going to our compressor just yet. Then we'll take that same socket, we're going to loosen up the negative, and we'll put our black ring terminal on that post. Now that we have our electrical connections made, we can start plumbing in all of their airlines. So we're going to start by grabbing the airline length out of our kit, and we need to make a connection from our air compressor connecting over to our ECU, but we want to put a T in place while we do that. So we're going to take a small section of airline, we'll just take the end of it, we're going to push it into the fitting. It'll kind of bottom out. You really want to make sure you push it all the way in, and if you tug on it, it should lock in place. Now instead of just going straight across, we want to give ourselves a little bit of length here because we want a loop that's going to be in our airline tube. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit, cut my airline, and whenever you cut your airline, you want to make sure you cut it nice and straight so it doesn't cut it on an angle and we have a nice clean flat cut. But again, we're going to put a little bit of a loop in there, kind of like this. And that's just so any kind of moisture or anything else that gets trapped in the line will have somewhere to settle. Then we can take our T. It's going to work just like the fitting that's on the compressor itself, so we'll just press it in there. And then we want to grab another little small section just so we can go from the T to the ECU. So it doesn't need to be that big, maybe just a few inches of airline tube. Again, just find the end of the hose, cut yourself a small section. Again, make sure it's straight. And plug one end into the ECU. Make our little loop. Make sure the moisture and everything has somewhere to go. And then we'll just plug it in there. So that'll leave us one more spot open on that T. So right now, the rest of your plumbing is going to depend on if you're adding a compressor to an existing set of airbags or if you're doing it all at the same time. I will let you know it's possible both ways, but it's definitely easier if you're doing it all at the same time, so you can kind of plan out how you want to run your airlines and where you need to put all your T-fittings in place. Now, we already have our airbags installed, so we're going to go ahead and run our plumbing, and we're going to make sure that you understand how it's all connected. But since it's already in place, it is going to get a little confusing of what we're disconnecting and reconnecting. So we're just going to go ahead and hook everything up and give you an overview of how all the lines are ran. So we should have that line coming from our T. Now these are going to start going back towards our bag. So if we follow that line, start running it towards the back along the frame here. You just want to make sure you zip tie and secure your airline as well as you feel comfortable using all the zip ties in your kit. Now, as it continues to come back, we started going back, following the frame, till we got to about our rear axle where the airbags are. Then we actually dropped it to the inside of the frame. Airline 2 came down, went right to this T. Now from the T, I took a very small section of airline and I went into the passenger side airbag. Now if we follow the other line that comes from that T, it'll go up and it'll go over. And this line actually was from our airbag's original install. So I didn't add this, this was already there. But again, if we continue following that line, it actually goes past the airbag and it starts going towards the back of the bumper. And continue following it, again, making sure you secure it down to all these existing lines and wires. And we can see that that line comes into another T. Now that T, another airline coming off of it, is going to come directly to the inflation valve that we have mounted with a no-drill bracket. Now that third and final airline is going to go back towards the same route that we took. So follow that airline. It's going to continue to come back, going towards the driver's side airbag and hook directly into it. So that way both bags are connected to the manual inflation valve as well as the compressor, so no matter which way we do it, both bags are going to get air, whether it's through the compressor or through the manual inflation. Now your kit is going to come with the no-drill bracket as well as the inflation valve itself. Now ours already had this in place because again we're adding a compressor to an existing airbag system, so we actually had two inflation valves, but the way you're going to mount everything up is the no-drill bracket is just going to use some large zip ties, but to mount up the inflation valve, just want to take the cap off, we'll loosen up the hex nut, and we'll come from the back side of the bracket, slide it through, and then you're just going to want to secure down that hex nut. Now the bracket's only plastic, so you don't really have to crank down on it. And then when you put any of your airlines in any of these push fittings, if you look really close, there's a little ring on there. If you push that ring close to the valve, maybe a little bit tight on this one, but you can pull the airline out if you ever need to. Just gotta make sure you push up on that. And then when you put them in place, you just wanna make sure that you press the airline in and it fully bottoms out. And it's not a bad idea to give it a quick tug, make sure it's not coming out. But we don't need this second inflation valve. Just for demonstration purposes, show you how easy it is to get that inflation valve hooked up. We're going to grab the hose and filter out of our kit now. Now your hose, you just want to slide it onto the barbed end of the filter. Maybe a little bit snug, but want to make sure we go past the barbs, and it slides on there and it's nice and snug. Now the other end of the hose we're going to take and we're going to push onto the barbed end on the end of the compressor. Now you want to make sure that you still leave a little bit of a loop, but again you want to press that on there till it fully seats and it goes past the barbs. We don't want it to just sit on there like that. We really want to get it all the way on there. It's a little bit snug, so you may just have to kind of work at it to get it to seat all the way. But now, again, we want to make sure we leave somewhat of a loop in here, but at the same time, we want to get the actual filter as high up as we can get it. We want to keep it away from as much of the road spray and grime and everything else that we can, to where this end to be nice and connected, and so this end to be nice and protected. And again, we want to leave that little bit of a loop just so we can have any kind of additional moisture or debris that may be trapped in the lines. It gets trapped lower than the filter. So I'm actually just going to route this over the top of the frame if I can and attach it as high as I can above the frame, and then we can always tie up any loose excess hose and wires so we can clean it up a little bit. So now that all the connections are made, I always like to take a little bit of time, go back, double check all my work. I'm going to tie up any loose wires, any hoses, and it's not a bad idea too, if you do have exposed wires or lines, put a little bit of wire loom, electrical tape, and really just make sure everything is protected and it looks nice. So once you have everything cleaned up, you're going to grab that 20 amp fuse we removed earlier and put it back in place. We're going to replace the cover on it. And then we want to grab our smartphone and download the app so we can turn our compressor on. So once you have the Air Command app downloaded, you're going to want to head and open it up. And it's going to ask you for a pass key. I already went ahead and put it in there. And you want to make sure that your Bluetooth is turned on, and it'll start automatically searching for the ECU. Now once you get it all connected, it'll automatically come up with a screen with a gauge. Now it's going to automatically go to 5 because that's the lowest amount, but we want to fill our bags up pretty high so we can check for leaks. So I'm going to take mine up to about 60 psi, and you can see the needle's going to start going and we can hear the compressor kicking on. So again, we want to let them fill up a good amount, and then we're going to check for leaks. So once our bags are done filling up and we know that they're holding at that pressure, we can see it's not dropping down, we can go ahead and set our phone aside, and we want to grab a bottle of soapy water. And we're going to come to all the connection points anywhere that the line goes into a fitting. So back here at the inflation valve, all the T's, the airbags and everything, and we want to spray them down, and we're going to be looking for bubbles. Now here you can see we have a very small leak, so we need to fix this, but this is what we're looking for. If you're getting bubbles that keep expanding and going on, that means that there is a leak. So we're going to go ahead and take the air out of our airbag so we can loosen up the line and fix this leak. Now, there's two different ways that we can lower or raise our air pressure, but we want to let all the air out so we don't disconnect the hose with all that pressure in there. So what we can do is we can either take the needle and sweep it down to where the 0 is, or we can use the arrow. So I'm just going to turn this down, and then it'll go down to 5 psi, which is the bare minimum amount we want in our bags, but we can loosen up the airline with just 5 psi in there. So whenever you have a leak, typically what I like to do is get somewhat of a small wrench and actually go around the airline so it hooks onto that collar there. Kind of press upward so it holds it in place, and then pull the airline out. Now typically where most leaks happen is right at the end of the airline tube. So I'm just going to take my cutters and I'm going to make sure I make a new, clean, straight cut on that airline. Then I'm going to reattach it, and again make sure it's fully seated in the valve, and we'll do the same thing for any other leaks that we had. You want to try to cut as little as possible off the airline so we don't lose a lot of slack. So once you do make that cut, put your airline back in place. You want to crank your bags back up to around 60-70 psi. And again, we're going to go through and spray all those connection points and make sure we actually took care of all those leaks. Look at our soapy water again. We'll spray down the same points that we fixed. and just go back and check all the connections again. Not going to hurt anything. Just want to make sure that we don't get any more of those bubbles expanding. Obviously this is soapy water, so there's a little bit of bubbles, but earlier we had a bunch of them expanding and popping. That's what is going to identify a leak. So obviously we're good here. We're just going to continue to follow the lines and check each connection point. But once you have all your connections made and you're sure there's no more leaks, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Firestone Air Command wireless compressor system on our 2016 Ford F-250.